Let me please introduce today's presenter, Gidget Pryor. Gidget has worked as a network administrator, programmer, developer, database administrator, analyst, business intelligence consultant, project manager, and solutions engineer. She has held many of these roles simultaneously. Presently, she is a solutions engineer and continues to maintain her MCT and certification credentials. Her main area of focus as an instructor and consultant was in data and analytics. She maintains ongoing expertise in many technology fields, including Azure, Office 365, Net, Windows, and security. In her current role, Gidget focuses on solutions for companies and individuals as they pursue new and enhanced skills development as well as certification. Gidget maintains focus and interest in computers and technology for their usefulness and applicability in the marketplace and strives to help others do the same. So with all of that, Gidget, it's yours. Let's begin.
All right, thank you. All right, so we want to take a look today at the certification tracks that Microsoft has announced that they are retiring, so the MCSA, the MCSE, and the MCSD. Those certification tracks were supposed to retire June 30th of this year. However, with the coronavirus, Microsoft has extended that to give an additional 7 months, so you will have time between now and January 31st to get your certification, January 31st of 2021. So you might be wondering why you should even pursue these certifications. If they are going to, in fact, expire, why would you pursue them? So our agenda today, we're going to look at why you should finish, some tips to help you finish, what your next steps are after you leave this presentation and go prepare for the certification, as well as next steps after these certifications. Microsoft has introduced the role-based certifications roughly about a year and a half ago. They've had Azure certifications longer than that, but the role-based certifications were introduced in January a year ago. We'll look at how to map the current certifications to the new role-based certifications. So if you're pursuing both, what your steps would be, and some practical steps to getting certified. We'll also look at why you might be interested in a role-based certification even if you are on-premise. Role-based certifications are the certifications that are primarily cloud-based. So why should you finish? The credentials are actually very valuable. These credentials are still some of the highest paid credentials in the industry. Also, this is your last opportunity for this type of certification. Microsoft is not going to have a new, at least as of now, there won't be a new MCSA, MCSE, or MCSD type of certification. They have gone to role-based only. These certifications do expire. I happen to have an MCSE that, for whatever reason, Microsoft had one MCSE that they said would not expire. And I happen to get that particular certification, but all certifications do expire after a period of time. The technology gets older, you are expected to recertify in the newer technology. As you pursue the certification, you will always have to study things that you don't know. I saw some statistics one time, actually it was a presentation that was given by Microsoft on a version of SQL Server. And I can't remember if it was 2005 or 2008, but it was the launch of that product. And they said that over 900 people worked on that version of that product. And that doesn't include all the features that were already in the previous version. So there's no way that you will ever learn everything that there is to know about a product. And Microsoft does reserve the right on the certification exam to ask you anything about the product. So studying causes you to learn things that you might not be working with in your own environment, things that you wouldn't learn otherwise. And it may be a feature that proves to be quite useful to you. There have been times where I was working on something on a project and, you know, encountering a particular issue with that product or project, and I've learned something during a certification that caused me to be able to solve an issue. So there's practical reasons for pursuing certification, even if you're not interested in the credentials themselves. So, and as I mentioned, these are still some of the highest paid certifications. So let's look at some quick tips to help you finish. Of course, Global Knowledge does offer classes. So we have individual classes that you can take to help you as you prepare. Most of the classes in the Microsoft product line are geared toward skills-based rather than certification-based. However, you are expected to have skills when you get to the exam. So the hands-on practice that you utilize in the classroom, hands-on practice that you have ongoing after the class is over with, those labs will help you as you prepare for the certification. We do also have some boot camps. Boot camps are geared more toward the certification. They're a very condensed format. They vary in length. We have had, over the years, we've had boot camps that are 5 days, 8 days, 9 days, 13 days, 14 days. They go typically from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. They are extended hours. They are extended days. They do go across the weekends in some cases. And they focus more toward the exams. They still focus toward skills, but they also have a very intense focus toward the exams. If you were to take a 5-day boot camp, let's say, that might be made up of 2 5-day courses if you were to take the courses themselves. So it is a very consolidated, very condensed format. You will also be expected to self-study. I know that's not a very popular thing to say. People want to be able to come to a class and just go take the exam afterwards. Even in a boot camp, Microsoft expects you to study. They always put things in the exam objectives that are not covered in the content of the course. If you're taking a boot camp, we try to address those things. However, if you're just taking a regular course and trying to prepare, you will need to look at the skills objectives, and I'll tell you where to find that to make sure that you have studied everything you need to study. There's exam prep software, and there's a couple of types of exam prep software. There is legitimate exam prep software, and there is cheat software. We do not recommend that you ever use cheat software. Microsoft can remove your certification credentials from you for doing so. And you want to, if you're pursuing certification, I hope that you want to pursue it in a legitimate way so that you can be proud of your accomplishment. The 2 that are the most popular for Microsoft, I came across another one recently. I haven't really looked at it very much, but the 2 that I have used a lot over the years are Kaplan IT. It used to be called Transcender. You may be familiar with it with that name, and Measure Up. Global Knowledge has used both of those pieces of software in our boot camp. So we had Transcender when it used to be called Transcender. Now we use Measure Up. So you have the exam prep software, and as you utilize the exam prep software, don't go in and just take the exam. Start the exam, immediately end the exam, which will cause you to fail the practice exam. But we're not interested in passing the practice exam right now. We're interested in learning with that software. So that gives you an opportunity to look at all of the questions, all of the possible answers, and an explanation about why they have selected the answer they've selected. If you do it the other way, you take the exam prep software, you see how well you can do. Let's say that there's a question that you were guessing. Not exactly guessing. You narrowed it down to a couple of options. You weren't really sure which one it was, and so you selected that. When you go to review the things you got wrong, you're not really that solid in that answer, but you happen to have guessed it correctly, so it's not going to show up as something you need to study. So studying the software, studying the questions, there's also white papers, links to take you to different websites to help you study that content. So use it as a learning tool. Get the most value out of that piece of software using it as a learning tool. The exam objectives are published, so Microsoft does have those published on their page. For every exam. So they'll tell you that, installing and configuring is going to be 20%. Creating databases is going to be, creating and configuring the database is going to be 15%. I just looked at the Q&A. The MCSE radically changed 5 or 6 years ago anyhow. So the current MCSE isn't what it used to be. Doesn't matter that it goes away. I think it matters that it goes away. It is changing, but it is a technology that is still widely used in the industry. There are still plenty of companies that have on-premise solutions. We do see companies, of course, that have gone completely to the cloud, but most companies have some on-premise, maybe some cloud, or maybe they're solely on-premise. And so I think it does matter. I think it's still really important to get this certification before it goes away. Then you have the exam itself, and we're going to talk some about the exam format, the questions that you have. There's a couple of different labels for exams. You may see something that's, implementing or querying, installing, those types of things that are an action that you're going to take. And then there are exams that are called design exams. Those are 2 different formats. When you see the term design in the title for the exam, when you see that word, you should think to yourself case study. Those are typically what are called testlets. They're little case studies that maybe have 7 to 10 questions that are associated with a particular case study. And then once you leave that case study, you can't go back to it. Many exams allow you to go back and forth through the questions, so you could mark something for review and come back to it later. You could mark that question and then come back at the end of the exam and make a comment about it. If you thought the question was unfair or unclear, you can make comments about that. You do need to read very carefully. Reading comprehension is a critical part of being able to pass the exam. They may say to you, especially on the role-based exams, Microsoft might say to you, you can go back and forth to questions 1 through 5, but when you go 6 through 10, you can't go back to your previous. So read carefully, read every word. All right, so what are the next steps? You need to decide on what your goal is. So perhaps you don't care about the MCSA, but you do care about getting certified in one of the titles. So you would like to have the MCP, which is the first step. If you take and pass any single exam, that makes you a Microsoft certified professional in that topic. So maybe you're a Microsoft certified professional in Windows 10. If your goal is to get the MCSA or the MCSE, the MCSA has 3 exams typically associated with it, depends on the track. And then you may have a couple more exams to be able to get the MCSE. So decide what your goal is and then think about the timeline that you have. Most people need a month or 2 to study for an exam. So if you plan to get the MCSE and you have 7 months, you should get started because there's 5 exams in that. You want to go ahead and make a plan of action. And then decide what's realistic for your schedule. Are you able to study 3 hours a night, 3 nights a week? Or is it better for you to block off 2 full weekends and try to study for an exam? Are you a person that needs to just absorb the material slowly over time, or are you a person that can absorb a lot of material and then just go knock out the exam? I would say for myself, with the exams that I've taken and passed over the years, it really depends. There are times where I've just gotten tired of studying, a little bit at a time, and so I'll just take a big block of time, study, and then go take the exams. I've actually taken multiple exams on a single day. All right, and then take action. Set a goal and follow through. All right, so let's look at some examples of the paths to certification. This is the MCSA and the MCSE for business intelligence. And I just took one example of this. This is a certification that I have, so I'm very familiar with it. You have the querying SQL Server. And notice that the course number, this is the Microsoft course number. The course number starts out with a 2. The exam starts out with a 7. If you see this format, you know that you're looking at an exam that is older. If the exams start out with a letter, like AZ or AI or DP, those are the newer role-based certifications. So you would take and pass the querying, SQL Server administration, and implementing a data warehouse. The implementing a data warehouse is really all about SSIS, if this is a track that you are pursuing. They call it implementing a data warehouse, but really that course is mostly around SSIS. You can take those in any order. In fact, you could start at the bottom of this chart. You could take designing business intelligence solutions before you take any of the other exams. You are not required to take them in a particular order. There are some things that it makes sense to study together. So for example, you might study querying SQL Server and SQL Server administration. You might study those around, at the same time. There's going to be some overlap. So preparing for one exam oftentimes helps you get ready for another exam. But that's not always the case. Neither of those exams really help you get ready for the data warehouse exam. The reporting services and data models exam and the designing business intelligence solutions exam, I studied for those together. There's a lot of overlap. One is an implementing type of exam, and the other one is the design, that case study type of format. And Microsoft reserves the right to change the format at any time. So I'm telling you in general terms what to expect. So once you've taken the 3 exams at the top, you will have achieved the MCSA in SQL Server. There are different types. So there's an MCSA in Windows as well. All right, and then at the bottom, you would have achieved the MCSE. Once you get all 5 of those exams, it requires all 5. Okay, another example, we've got the Windows Server. So in this case, you're going to be required to take 4 exams. So to get the MCSA, again, it's 3 exams. And the MCSE, you take one of these exams. I didn't list out the titles of all of them, but you would need to take and pass one of those given your particular area of interest. Role-based certifications, these are not brand new, but they are the newer type of exams. The idea behind role-based certifications is that Microsoft looks and says, what is a person's job responsibilities? And we're going to create exams around that. Well, my job responsibilities might be as an administrator, but I'm an administrator in the Microsoft Cloud. So I'm an administrator in Azure, and there is a certification for that. So these certifications are intended to apply to specific Azure-based roles. And when I say Azure-based roles, I don't just mean Azure-based roles that have Azure in the title. So you might be looking at data and analytics in the cloud. Those are the DP certifications. So there's DP 100 if you want to become a data scientist. There's 200 and 201 if you want to become the data engineer. So there's an AI certification. These are things that we've taken from on-premise and we've moved that responsibility into the cloud. I personally think, after being an instructor for so long and taking so many exams myself, I think that the old certifications, or the ones that we're talking about today, the MCSA, MCSE, MCSD, those map to job responsibilities as well. But it is a branding that Microsoft has created that's called role-based. So I'm looking at the Q&A. At this moment, which certifications do you think have higher value and priority in obtaining? Please provide your recommended order. Okay, so we've got AZ 103, that has actually changed to AZ 104. They've updated that. It is very similar. So they shifted some of the modules. So in the AZ 103 course, I didn't personally teach that course, but it's my understanding that at the end of the course, they teach you things like logging in and, you know, networking. Well, really, to get started in Azure, you need to be able to log in and get connected to the network. So they've moved those modules to the beginning of the course rather than having them at the end. And they did add some new content, but it's mostly the same. So if you were already preparing for the AZ 103, then you know, you might go ahead and pursue the AZ 104. The AZ 103 is an older exam. Then you've got the AZ 500, the Azure Security Engineer, and the 2016 upgrade exam. I would say that they are all important in different ways. So I'm going to answer the question a little differently than you've asked it. If you are an Azure administrator, you will be expected to know something about security, right? But a first step for you might be to get that Azure Administrator exam, to get that foundation. That's a very core set of skills to be able to have, whereas the Azure Security Engineer is a very valuable certification, but it is a more specialized certification. So I don't know that we would want to have a security engineer that doesn't know anything about the basics in Azure. Does that make sense? And then we have the 7743, the upgrade exam. Upgrade exams, I'm just going to make a comment about them. Upgrade exams are great because you take the exam and you get it out in one shot. However, keep in mind that with those upgrade exams, you're being tested in multiple areas. So let's say the test normally would have 50 questions, but this upgrade exam covers 2 tests. You're going to get 25 questions and 25 questions, and you have to pass both sections. So the upgrade exams are extremely difficult because the amount that you are allowed to miss is much less. I took an upgrade exam, just a side note here. I took an upgrade exam and I got, on one part of the exam, I got a 691, a 700 is passing. And then on the other part, I passed. I don't even remember what my score was. So I missed it by a part of a question, which was quite frustrating. So I went back and I took the exam again and I passed it that time on both sections because I still wanted to get it out of the way in one shot. And then Microsoft came back and said, I'm sorry, but for instructors, we have decided not to count the upgrade exam. We want you to take the full exam for both of them. So I now had to go back and take both exams separately. And then they came back and said, oh, we will actually count the upgrade exam. So I just kept taking that exam over and over again. But I'm not a fan of upgrade exams. I've seen students try to take them over the years and they have a higher failure rate. Okay, so I'm just looking at the chat here and the question here. So I'm hoping you're going to show the newer equivalent of MCSA, MCSE of business intelligence. The newer equivalent, there's not really an equivalent, but what is newer is the like DP200, DP201, the DP100 has some of it, and the AI. So doing that type of analytics, business intelligence in the cloud, those would be the equivalent things. So instead of looking at SQL Server only, you're going to look at SQL Server and you're going to look at NoSQL. And you're going to look at things like Cosmos DB and MongoDB and machine learning and artificial intelligence. So they didn't exactly map them. All right, so not all the titles for the role-based certifications include Azure. These could be Office 365, the data and analytics. There are equivalent careers and certifications in the cloud. So I became an MCT in, I guess in 2000, but I had achieved some Microsoft certifications before that. So I've been an MCT for 20 years. I am currently, just because I'm interested in the technology, I am currently working on the certification for DP 200 and 201. It's very difficult. And I have many years of industry experience in SQL Server and database and analytics and business intelligence, but the newer technology, it's very different. You shouldn't expect that you'll be able to just walk in and not have to learn a whole new set of skills. So there's a mapping, but there's not an exact equivalent. There's an exact equivalent to some things. You could create a virtual machine in SQL Server in the cloud. You could create a SQL database there. It has some differences, but yeah, there's not a one-for-one mapping. So I hope that answers your question. All right, so MCSA, MCSE, what those people were doing have equivalent careers and certifications in the cloud. If you want to be an administrator, there's an administrator. If you want to be the engineer, but you want to do something like that in the cloud, if we're talking about Windows, you would become a solutions architect. The recommended path for the solutions architect, I want to address that one specifically. The recommended path for that is that you would take the 300 and 301 exam right now, AZ 300, AZ 301. That is changing to 303 and 304. Microsoft says you can just have some fundamentals in Azure and then go take that. We see an extremely high failure rate if you take that path. Recommended if you want to become the equivalent of an MCSE in Azure administration types of duties, you will take Azure fundamentals, the AZ 104, which is the administrator, and then architect. So the architecting exam, the 300 especially, is one of the most difficult exams Microsoft has ever had. All right, and so you could have other things like modern desktop, MD 100, 101, developer, which is the AZ 204. Now it was AZ 203, but it's AZ 204. Office 365, there's several of those. There's a Teams certification. There's the Office 365 Administrator certification. You could have a SQL Server. And there are, of course, different levels. So they have the associate, which is, so they have fundamentals, which is beginning, associate, which is the next level, and then architect. But not all of the topics have all three of those. All right, so just to give an example here, in a diagram format, if you want to become an architect, this is the path that I was just talking about. I currently still have this AZ 300 and 301 exam on here, but this is changing very fast. The curriculum has already been released for the 303 and 304. I have no idea why they didn't use the number 302 and just take the next number, but it's 303 and 304. All right, and so if you are currently on premise and you want to think about how to map that MCSA and MCSE, you decide to pursue these, or MCSD, what would be your next step into the cloud? So for Windows 10, you would move to modern desktop. If you're on-premise Windows Server and you want to move to the cloud, that's the Azure Administrator and Architect. If you've got SharePoint, Exchange, you're going to look at Office 365. .NET is going to be the Azure Developer and perhaps Azure DevOps. Those may or may not be the same person. A developer is the person writing the code. DevOps is the person maintaining the code. So that may be more of an administrative person. And then for SQL Server, you can continue on into a SQL Server certification. There is a course. I haven't seen any other course like it, but there is a course that is our course code 4397. It's 50% on-premise SQL Server and 50% cloud-based Azure SQL Server. So you do have that, or of course you could pursue those DP titles. All right, so let's talk about some steps to getting certified. What are the practical things that you need to do to get certified? What is required is that you take and pass the exam. If you can go take and pass the exam and you don't need anything else, that's fine. Microsoft does not require you to take a course. They do not require you to have, to even look at the exam objectives. They do not require you to do test prep software. They don't require you to even study. If you can take it and pass it, you can go right ahead, and that's all that's required. Just kind of a funny story and maybe something encouraging if you ever do fail an exam. Years ago, I was teaching a class in our DC training center, and I had an exam voucher with a free retake, and it was going to expire. And at the time, I held the MCDST, which was the desktop support. I held that certification. And I had, it was debating whether I wanted to move into Windows Vista. That was the next step. So we're going from XP to Windows Vista. And I thought, I'm probably not going to work with Vista. I'm probably not going to do too much teaching in Vista. But I've got a free exam voucher and there's nothing else I really want to take. So I'm just going to go see what's on it. So I had a conversation with someone who was working in Vista, like he had practical experience. So maybe 30-minute conversation. I studied exam prep software for about an hour because I didn't want to invest a lot of time in it. I didn't know if I even really cared about it, but I didn't want to just completely waste the voucher. And I thought, you know, and I have a free retake. And I made, I think, a 971 or something like that. It was a really, really high score, one of the highest scores I've ever made. I was completely guessing. It was like, oh yeah, that sounds like what Microsoft would call it. And thinking the whole time, I'm failing, but it's okay because I have a free retake and I was just coming here to see what's on it. And I was so shocked that I passed. So just because you pass an exam doesn't mean you know the technology. And just because you fail an exam doesn't mean you don't know it. I mean, the T-SQL exam, the one I was talking about with the upgrade, I know that technology very well. But I just missed it by a part of a question, and I was taking the upgrade, which is a much more difficult exam. So what is the recommended path? I would recommend that you take the class, you get the skills that you need. The skills will help you on the exam. Having some knowledge is helpful on the exam. It can also hurt you. So if you know that in the real world you would never do something a certain way, and they put that as a possible answer on the exam, and you sit and you argue with that saying, but you wouldn't do it that way, but none of these other options work. You can only choose from what they have given you on the exam. So try not to overthink it. Try not to overanalyze. Just choose from what they have given you. And if you don't know the answer to a question, you need to go ahead and fill it in. Go ahead and choose something, because if you choose incorrectly and get it wrong, okay, but you might get the right answer. And if you don't mark it, you for sure get it wrong. So make sure you answer everything. Also, taking those exam objectives, go out to the Microsoft website, see what they're going to test you over. Make sure that you know every detail of what they have said. They will be testing you on what those skills say. And then also doing your own self-study. One of the things that I do, and this may sound like a silly trick, But one of the things that I do is I write out things kind of in a column format on my paper in different colors. I can't tell you the number of times that I've gotten to an exam and I'm like, oh, it was in green on the left-hand side of the page. And then I'm able to remember it. So give yourself different ways to remember your clues. And then definitely the exam prep software. All right, so why is role-based certification important if you're on premise? So we're looking at it the other way now. Why would you care? Well, you are probably going to interact with people from other companies that are cloud-based. You might just want to be educated about what's in the cloud. You might want to be educated about the security of that. It might give you some pause when you give access to everything on your computer. You know, we want to track your location, or when you download apps onto your phone, you might want to be knowledgeable ahead of time. And your company probably will eventually migrate either some or everything to the cloud. You will interact with other people that are cloud-based. Back in April, I was working, trying to get some money refunded to me. It was my money out of my flex spending account. And I was trying to get a refund, and there were some problems. And there were problems because of what they were doing, what they had going on in the cloud. And the person I was talking to, she was just trying to accept my receipts. But we were able to figure that out, or I was able to figure out what was going on, and then she was able to go talk with the people inside her organization, and we got it taken care of. So, you know, having some knowledge ended up being worth about $800 to me. So that was good. Might have been March, but it was around that time. All right, and then it also enhances your skills. Being knowledgeable of the cloud, I mean, your company may say that they are never going to use the cloud, and that may be true. They may never move to the cloud, but eventually on-premise software is being supported less and less. You may notice that certifications on-premise are supported less and less. So it enhances your skills, your knowledge. You may not always be at the company you're in right now. So continuing to learn is a good path. All right, so I think I see there are some more questions in the Q&A. Do I recommend taking AZ 500 after 104 before pursuing the solutions architect? I think the more familiar you can become with the exam process, the better. I probably would do that. If I had an interest in the AZ 500, I probably would do 104, then 500, and then do 300, or what's going to become 303 and 304. Being more familiar with the process, I think, is really helpful. Those exams, the 300 is a very difficult exam because it covers so many areas. There's, you know, design in there, there's architecting, there's networking, there's programming, there's SQL Server. I mean, you have to be so knowledgeable in so many different areas. What are the top certifications you recommend for best positioning yourself for full-time remote opportunities? I think really choosing your certification based on your aptitude. So for example, I was a network administrator for about 18 months. And I was actually pretty good at it. But I didn't like it. I really just, did not care for it. Now, teaching networking and teaching people to be administrators, I really enjoyed that because those people had that aptitude and they really wanted that type of career. So that was enjoyable to me. But just patching the server, just figuring out why something doesn't work, that was not interesting to me. I'm very much more naturally oriented to data and analytics and programming. So I think you should choose based on your aptitude. The architect certification is in high demand, but the architect certification, you need to have some years of experience to go with it to get that architecting. And I think that remote opportunities are just, there's a lot of remote opportunities now. Let's say, you know, I have some friends that have recently gotten their desktop, their modern desktop certification and found work with that. So I think that, you know, it's really based more on what you know and what you like. I think they're all in high demand. What's in extremely high demand, but it's a very small market, is the AI and analytics types of certifications. But there's a lot fewer jobs. Do you know what the split is between cloud versus on-premise percentage-wise? Do you mean on the exam? If you're talking about the SQL exam that I mentioned, it's about a 50-50 split. If you're talking about any of the other certifications, they're either on-premise or they're cloud, unless there is a title. And I don't know that there's an exam title that's called hybrid, but there are some courses that are called hybrid. So if you see the term hybrid in that. Oh, so what's the split between cloud versus on-premise percentage-wise in the industry? I don't know that answer. I think, you know, it's rapidly moving more toward the cloud, but I see a lot of people that are still on-premise. And there are some industries that say, we're never moving because of certain regulations that we have or certain concerns we have about security. Microsoft and other people have certainly tried to respond to that and to give people confidence. But I don't, yeah, I think that there are some companies that are just like, nope, we're afraid of the cloud and we're not moving. So what are all the IT positions to get certified? I'm not sure I understand the question. Would you mind clarifying that for me a little bit?
Yeah, Vivo 1904, if you wouldn't mind maybe clarifying that in the Q&A, because it's a little difficult to answer that question.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know what that means. The exams are only in English, or can we take the exam in other languages like French or Spanish, for example? That is a great question. I do not know the answer to that. How could it be certified for so many years and not know the answer to that? Because my Spanish is pretty good, but not good enough to take an exam. And French, I don't know. I don't know the answer, but the place that you can find out is if you go to pearsonview.com. They should be able to answer that. That's the provider of the exams.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gidget. Really, really appreciate your time today. This has been fantastic. I know we probably have some more questions coming in here. I would encourage you to reach out to our social media team at Global Knowledge. Make them earn their paychecks. They're very good at hooking you up at who you need to talk to, the right resources to get your questions answered. So with that, please be sure to continue to visit the Global Knowledge website to access free additional resources like technical articles, white papers, and webinars. And again, a huge thanks to everyone that joined today, all your fantastic questions, amazing engagement, and of course to Gidget Pryor for the fantastic presentation. Thanks again, Gidget.
Yes, and I'm also putting a couple of things in the chat. So I put my email address in the chat if you want to email me. And if I can get it to come up.
Yeah, take your time, and what I'll do is I'll just leave it going for a little while. I'll stop the recording, everyone, but I will leave the webinar open. So if you need to copy paste all that good stuff, I'll leave it here for you. And just a friendly reminder, this will all be provided to the recording in about a week to the email that you used to register.
So what I have just posted in the chat is it's about the exam format, the types of questions that you will get. You get multiple choice, drag and drop types of questions. Sometimes fill in the blank. Multiple choice doesn't mean A, B, C, and D. I've had some that are A through M, choose all that apply. So, and we do have another webinar that was, that we did in January. If you want to look back, I think it was January 7th, on more about how to study for the exams, just exams in general, details about how to study. You can find that on the Global Knowledge website on the resources page. All right, so I'll stick around. If there's any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone.